Now, greetings, comrades, and you're welcome to our usual. It was initially Sundays, but currently it's now Monday's book review. This book review is actually, as I've said before, is an initiative of the Pan-African Library that we are having. And the Pan-African Library is actually also the initiative of members of Consciousness Study Group. And those who felt that we should be having stores of some of the books as a study group for the purpose of consciousness and just information. So some few members, we started a library by one of the coordinators, Samira, and then members contributed some money. We were able to subscribe to some online virtual libraries where we were able to download. I was the one in charge of that, so I was able to download 100 books in a day for almost 3 to 4 months. 3, 4 months or 5 months. So we then we got so far almost 8,000 soft copy books. And the books we were downloading for the Pan-African Library were actually books written or authored by Africans, especially either Blacks or about Africa. So we created the virtual library, which we have a Telegram library, and we do share, for where we have over 7,800 books. We still take requests for anybody who want to request any book. And now from that library, there was a need for us to review some of the books that are there. So we started a separate day just for book review from the Pan-African Library. So this is like a book club. But our usual book study is on Thursdays, where we do study our main book, which is the Consciousism, which is the philosophy and ideology for decolonization, written by Kwame Nkrumah in early 1960s, early 63s. And that's the name of our study group, called Consciousism Study Group. So this is actually an effort, extra effort by members who felt that we should have a library and we should have maybe a book review. So we have been reviewing one of the book we selected first. Of course, people have shared contrary opinion to the author and some of his writings and his school of thought, because one thing we must be conscious is that we are doing a book review, and in the process of book review, you share your critical examination of the text. So we encourage more of critical thinking rather than argument on how you understand the lenses. And one thing we have learned from Consciousness on Thursdays is that every writing has some ideological standpoint. So we also need to see the ideological standpoint of the author and what they are trying to portray. So we've read this book for the last around 3 to 4 months, and we are now in page 142, and now we are dealing with the demise of despotic regime. And our last reading ended with the political instability. And today we are now starting on reforming a despotic regime, which I have issues with. Whether a despotic regime, if there has to be a despotic regime, does it need a reform or it need a destruction? So we are going to read about this today and share our thoughts on this, our understanding, basically, but not that, our thinking on this, as we do on our Thursday classes. So feel most welcome, comrades, those who have joined us. This class is recorded for the purposes of future reference. For anybody who might want to come back to any of the text, to anybody who might want to share our conversation to members who are not able to join us, that's why we do regular recordings. If you feel that your thought process is unsafe to share with us, we can actually also note or remove that part of why you think is unsafe before we actually share the recording on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much, and greetings to you now, Sister Chisomo, Kanita, Sawindok, and Brother Bongani. It's a pleasure to see you with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. So as per our tradition, we'll either ask any member who is able to read for us the text. We read a whole subheading, then we just examine it, review it, before we go to the next subheading. If there's any member who feel that they're able to see the screen and may want to read for us, please let me know. If there's no member, then I will read the text. Any member? Okay. So let me read the text then. The subheading is Reforming a Despotic Regime. And the author, which is Dr. Georgia Iti, is saying, as we have seen above, despotism is untenable and will eventually collapse or be toppled, often violently. Although there is no such thing as an enlightened despot, an oxymoron, let us allow that a few of them may see the light and make a feeble attempt to reform their abominable systems. In fact, there are often reform-minded people in the despotic or in the despot circle who might persuade him to change course. One example is the reformers in the government of former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. But such reformers can also be sidelined or worse. Nonetheless, a dictatorship is a controlled society. Liberating such a society requires reform in several key areas. And one is in economics, in political, in intellectual, institutional, and constitutional. Economic liberalization requires removal of state control on the economy, greater reliance on the private sector, and a move towards a market economy, which I have issues with, as the author is trying to put them. I'll come to that later. Now, political reform involves opening up the political space and establishing some form of democratic pluralism and accountability. By intellectual reform is meant permitting freedom of expression, assembly, and movement, as well as freedom of religion. Now, everyone, including the rat at the top, must obey the same law. It is the law that rules, not the whims of the despot. Now, institutional reforms also involve the establishment of a more independent judiciary to uphold the rule of law and instilling professionalism into the civil service and the police, military, and security forces, who are supposed to protect the people, not the bandits and killers in power. Constitutional reform requires redefining the role of the executive and the structure of the state. A despot may attempt reform grudgingly and haltingly in a process infused with self-doubt. Political reform is out of the question, as that will amount to committing political suicide. Intellectual freedom does not come into consideration, but that will expose the deficiencies and failures of the despotic regime. Institutional reform will cut into his exercise of power and undermine his support base. Now, for example, the independent judiciary needed to enforce the rule of law will pose too much of a threat to the despot. Reform of the civil service would cause massive layoff of redundant party supporters. Thus, The despot might opt for economic reforms, but reforms in one area alone is not sufficient and might even bring the house down on him. Piecemeal reform is worse than no reform at all, because reform is only one area of political economy, of reform in only one area of political economy creates stresses in the other areas. It is akin to tuning up the engine of an automobile without repairing the defective brakes. The whole political economy of dictatorship must be reformed. And in this exercise, the sequence of reform is critical. This author has always argued that the ideal sequence should start with intellectual freedom, then political reform, then constitutional reform, then institutional reform, and finally economic liberalization. If a despotic system must be reformed, the people must have the intellectual freedom to determine what sort of political or economic system would be more suitable for them. The freedom that helped bring down the Soviet Union was glasnost, which is openness. Economic liberalization before political reform put the cart before the horse. And political reform before intellectual freedom put the wheel before the cart. Despots seldom level the playing field. They favor economic liberalization only for those businesses allied to themselves. Those who prosper are those with political connections or insider knowledge, such as the oligarchs in Russia. But they seldom keep their wealth in the country. Eventually, however, the day of reckoning arrives when economic prosperity hits the political ceiling. This may be triggered by the fall in copper prices, like, for example, what happened in Chile, a slump in cocoa price, like what's happened in Ivory Coast, the 1997 Asian financial crisis, like in Indonesia, the death of a dictator and succession wars, like in Ivory Coast and the former Yugoslavia, a stolen election, like in Madagascar and Iran, or social unrest provoked by a lack of jobs and deteriorating living conditions, like what happened in Tunisia, Egypt, and Yemen. For example, people who have lost money on account of financial crisis want explanations, and they want those responsible to be held accountable. When prosperity enriches only the ruling vampire elites, leaving the mass of people in abject poverty, or crony or vampire capitalism, growing social inequality may provoke resentment and erupt into street protest. If the regime hikes prices of food or other essential items, if the despot is enlightened enough to open up the political space and address public grievances, or if he flees, it allows him to be vented and the economic prosperity to continue. Unfortunately, most despots keep the political lead on, and the pent-up frustrations erupts into a revolution ousting the despot and causing all the gains made and economic liberalization to unravel. Such was the case in Indonesia, Ivory Coast, in Madagascar, and the former Yugoslavia. It is a real dilemma for despots. If they open up the political space, they'll be tossed out in an election. If they refuse, they'll be consumed by the flames of the ensuing revolution. It is a no-win situation for the despot. China currently faces this dilemma. Its economic liberalization program has been widely successful, transforming China into a great economic power. But the program has also produced Rolls-Royce communists and venture capitalists, like the oligarchs in Russia. According to a report released by China's central bank in June 2011, thousands of corrupt Chinese government officials have stolen more than $120 billion. And they fled overseas, mainly to the US. Now, between 16,000 and 28,000 officials, the employees of state-owned companies left China with the funds from the mid-1990s until 2008. The official used offshore banks account to smuggle the funds into the United States, Australia, Canada, and Holland. Now, already, demands for intellectual and political freedom are getting louder. If the Communist parties adamantly refuses to heed to these demands, China may disintegrate like the Soviet Union. With Tibet and the far western provinces break away. And all the gains made under economic liberalization will be dissipated. We discuss in greater details the issue of reform sequence in chapter 8. That's the end of chapter 5 on what we call the reforming of despotic regime. Now, comrades, feel most welcome to those who have joined us as we're doing the reading. Now it's time for any member to come in to share what they think or anything they are pointed out in the process of the reading. These are the thoughts of the author. It's not the thoughts of us as individuals. We invite members here to critically examine these thoughts and share what they think about the thoughts of the text. Thank you very much. Anybody? Anybody want to come in? Sister Kanita, do you want to come in?
Sorry, I'm trying to go back and look at some things to formulate my thoughts. Is there a way to scroll up and down with what you shared, or?
Yeah, I can move it. I can move it anywhere.
Oh, okay. But we can't do it on our own. It's only you who can do it. Is that correct?
Yeah, but if you have a copy of the book, you can do it from your side as well.
Oh, okay. No, I don't have a copy of it. Okay, I'll just do what I can with what I can see. Thanks so much.
But I'm sharing the copy of the book in the chat. It may not be useful now, but it may be useful in future.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Now, anybody who feel that there's something they're pointing to, welcome, Sister Amma. We are looking at the despotic regime. We are looking at what Dr. It is trying to propose as the formula of liberation. That it might start with, he's saying it must start with intellectual freedom, then it goes to political. What's the sequence? Yeah, its sequence is somewhere here. That so I also want to highlight some of these, but feel free to comment on the whole text that I've read here.
Okay, sorry. Good evening. What page is it on?
We are from page 142.
Okay, the reason I'm going to see whether I can look at it in the yeah.
We are at reforms of despotic regime.
142, yeah, because I find it easier to look on the
Yeah, and I've shared the book in the chat, so anybody can also open it.
I've just downloaded it, so it's 142. What is it again?
Yeah, 142, reforming a despotic regime.
Okay, I'll try.
It's the last part. Is the last part of chapter 5, actually, the last subheading.
Yeah, so just carry on, and I'm trying to find it.
Okay, Brother Ifo, please come in.
Mine is from page 144.
Oh, the same subheading?
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. As long as you take note that it's the last subheading of the, no, this is another version. This is not the book that I shared before. So this is a book I've downloaded now. It's another version. So the pages might be different. But for this version that I've shared in the chat is 142. If you had the initial version of this book, it may be 144 that Sir Windhoek is talking about. Now, Brother Ifo, please come in as Sister Amma is trying to check the text. Brother Ifo?
Okay. I was stuck in a work meeting, so I came in late. I was wondering, did the author mention culture in as one of the things that is needed for revolutionary change?
No, he didn't mention that.
Okay.
Now, this is the only thing he mentioned. Are you seeing there's something I've lighted in green? He says
No,
that
no,
the author...
I saw that, but when
Okay,
I came
okay,
in was about
okay,
5 minutes ago, so I just wanted to, I didn't want to talk about something if they didn't mention it. Okay.
okay.
So I think that one is glaring. Um, and I think sometimes there is, the question is which intellectuals are they talking about? Because sometimes we have the intellectual, there's sometimes an intellectual class that enjoying some of the benefits of the oppression, who are often not as eager to um, to risk. I think it was Fela Kuti who talked about the importance of some of those members of that class committing what they call class suicide in order to push the revolution forward. I don't know if that was mentioned at all, but those are just my reflections now, and I'll read some of the text as we go. Thank you.
Can I just ask a question? Hello? Oops.
Sorry, Sister Chisomo, I was muted. I was commenting on Brother Ifo, and then I want you to come in after I have finished my comment. Is that
All
okay?
right. Okay. That's okay.
Yeah, I was explaining to Brother Ifo that the only issue that has been talked in regards to intellectual reform that is mentioned is what I've highlighted, that by intellectual reform is meant permitting freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and movement, as well as freedom of religion. Everyone, including the rat at the top, must obey the same law. And that is now thinking in terms of intellectual reform. He has not mentioned culture in terms of the sequence of that. And as you are pointing out, I think something very important. And whether the despotic regimes, as he's trying to allude to, also erodes our cultural standpoint. But yeah, that is it. So, Sister Chisomo, Sister Kanita, Sister Kanita's hand was up. If you allow me to take her hand, then I come to you, Sister Chisomo. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sister Hanita, please go ahead, and then I'll come to Sister Chisomo.
Thank you so much. So I definitely agree, and I appreciate what was mentioned about culture. And at least so far in what was read, it seems to be omitted. Perhaps it might be addressed later in some meaningful and substantive way. And the reason why I want to punctuate and underscore what the previous speaker inquired about culture is I'm a strong believer in that culture is our immunity. And in particular, culture as it relates to the aggregate of our best ideals and practices. For instance, we wouldn't see ourselves historically as a rape culture or an annihilation culture. And while people may use similar types of terms to refer to maybe, let's say, the Vikings, who were well known for their rape and pillage, ways of travel and engaging other people groups, we as Africans, our culture reflects our best selves, our highest ideals. So in this instance, I think it is important that culture be a component of this, and it begins to be easy to see how despots are contrary to culture. That, in fact, one of the ways that they accomplish what they accomplish is the fact that they aggress against culture and undermine it in many ways and in many forms. But the other thing that I would also add to what the previous speaker asked about culture is courage. When you look at the SNCC movement in the 1950s and 60s in the States, when you look at Malcolm X and his movement, even Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and we can of course go back to that prior to those movements, when you look at the necessary and honorable plantation revolts of the enslaved Africans in America, those noble acts require a great deal of courage. And yes, there's the intellectual piece and the political piece and an institutional piece and all of these things that must needs be put forth. But there's also this thing of courage. And one of the things that I've noticed through the years is that this is also what is an essential element of positive change, particularly when people are shifting out from underneath the tyranny of a despot, is that it takes a great deal of courage. It really does. And it seems so simple and it seems so obvious that perhaps maybe that's why it's not stated. But the reality, when we revere people like Steve Biko, Walter Rodney, so many other people through the years, through the centuries and the decades, who died for their beliefs, particularly those who were tortured. Guys, listen, torture hurts. It's painful to be held in a jail cell, as Dr. King and so many were, and to be tortured in so many, in the different ways that they write about in those authors who wrote about those experiences. This is very, very painful. So there's an incredible nobility to speak about speaking truth to power, but with that comes the very real reality, and that is, but are you willing, though, to suffer physical pain? When someone is cutting you, burning you, breaking limbs and fingers, and other forms of torture, this is also part of it. And that's not to say that most people will have to endure it, but there's other forms of anguish that are a part of it. When you look at the bus boycott, I used to say to my psychology students, when I taught psychology at the college level in the States for several years, I would tell them under the course objective, when we talked about stress and coping, they didn't just sit around one evening and say, hey, you guys, wouldn't it be fun if we did a bus boycott? Wouldn't that just be the cutest thing? These are people who endured attacks from people, from dogs. These are people who were fired from jobs and had to get food from friends and neighbors. So there was a lot of pain, physical and psychological, and characterological, that is associated with these things. And I would imagine, myself being very unfamiliar with this book, but happy to learn, to read it, I would imagine that if it's not addressed in the previous chapters, I would have a hard time believing that it's not going to be addressed in upcoming chapters. So just to sum it up really quickly, courage, I think, is another piece of the puzzle. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sister Kanita. If you were to put cultural reform under the sequence that is provided, for example, in his sequence, the author started with intellectual freedom, political reform, constitutional reform, institutional reform, and finally economic liberalization. Where will you put culture if it was to be in your sequence? Sister Kanita, will we start with the cultural reform, or will you end with cultural reform?
Yeah, your question, is it to me or to all of us?
No, to you, from your own thought process, in that sequence.
Sure, I would absolutely put it first.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that.
Years old, when
no-
you're 2 years old, when you're 5 years old, we began to teach culture.
yeah. Thank you for that. Sister Chisomos wanted to come in, but I see the three hands are up. Of course, I've come after Sister Chisomo, including Sister Amma hand that has gone down. So if you permit me to take Sister Chisomo, take Sawindok, then I'll go to Sister Amma, whose hand was up initially, then I'll come to Brother Bongani, whose hand is now up currently. So Sister Chisomo, come in
No,
first.
my question, you've just answered the question I was going to ask. It was just a question to say, can you just repeat the list? So you've just mentioned it: intellectual, political, constitutional, institutional, and economic. And then these other three, for me, it's three others that have come up: culture, courage, and pain. So if the other people can go ahead, so I can then just work through these that I now know they are.
Okay, thank you. I think at this particular moment, we are commenting on a despot, irrespective of the definition of a despot, but rather the sequence of how to deal with it. But I think anybody is also free to come in on that. Let me first of all now get from Sawindok, then Sister Amma will come to you, and then I'll go to Brother Bongani. So Sawindok?
Greetings. You have added another dimension, which is or an additional dimension, which is culture. Would you want to be talking about cultural reform? And will this be culture as in culture of the society going on about their lives, or will it be culture as in the way the despotic regime has been operating or has been run? Because reforming a culture, in my mind, like culture in the sense of the way of life of the society, in practicing their traditions and the like, I can't figure it well. I can't envision it well. So if someone can help me there, if my concerns or my comments are clear, they would be very much welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I allow Brother Ifo, who had first comment on culture, and then if Sister Kanita want to add on that your response question, and then I'll go to Sister Amareta. But yes, Brother Ifo, come in on the question by Sawindok.
Okay. Culture is fundamental. Most of us have the misfortune of going to colonial schools. So we have learned how to speak the colonialist language and to think like them. And so if we do not figure out who we truly are on a cultural level, because the culture is not just the dance, the traditions, the food, it is how you fundamentally think. And if we are thinking like Europeans, or if we're thinking like Arab people, then if we will be well-meaning, but we will end up colonizing our own people. Also, overwhelmingly, our traditions are matrilineal and also overwhelmingly communal. But if you look at the colonial ideology, whether it's the colonialist from the Arab world or colonialist from the European world, the purpose of their culture was individual, to take care of the one rich person and then everybody else to serve them. And so if we do not, when we have a cultural revolution, we will think of ourselves not as individuals in the colonial sense, but in the spirit of Ubuntu, in the spirit of Sankofa, we will think of ourselves as us, as family. And when you operate anything as family, things are different. Same thing as a business. If you have a business, if you have a government division, if you have the Department of Education, Health, all these things, when you think of them from a scientific socialist perspective, culturally, you approach them as fundamentally different from when you look at those things as a commodity or as a way to raise capital for the capitalist class. So that's why I think cultural revolution is fundamental, and I agree with the previous person who said that that should be first. Otherwise, everything else is will be missing road, as we say back home. I hope that was clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Sister Kanita, will you want to add on that to the questions Brother Windhoek has asked?
I agree with him 10,000%.
Thank you. Sir Windhoek, back to you.
Thank you. So, cultural reform and cultural replacement and cultural revolution all includes one and the same thing. If it is, I rest. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have, in previous studies, we have dealt with the topic revolution or reform.
Can I come in, Chair?
Yeah, Brother Bongani, I'll allow you to come in if you want. Brother Bongani, I know Sister Amma was up, but I'll allow you to come in if that's okay. I will stop my comment first. Sister Amma, will you allow Brother Bongani to go ahead and then you come later?
On what basis?
No. But
No,
that's why
I'm asking this seriously. I actually don't mind him going ahead of me, but I'm saying on what basis? Because there's an assumption that what he is going to say is more important than what I'm going to say, or is more relevant.
No, what I'm feeling, I'm feeling is either he want to interject the question being raised rather than his own comment. So
Well,
I need to confirm that before.
That I also no, because I'm challenging these things. There's an assumption. I'm patiently waiting. There's an assumption that what I want to say is also not an interjection. But because he has raised his voice and says he wants to come in, but I will allow him to come in. But I'm just asking you to think on that, because if somebody's let me finish. If somebody is patiently waiting, do not assume that what I want to say is of less relevance than what he wants to say. I will now wait.
No, thank you. That's why I've consulted you first. So, Brother Bongani, we have Sister Amma's permission to go ahead.
No. She can go first. She can go first. I thought there was no one who's coming. I just wanted to come on the culture side, but
okay.
No, it's fine. She can carry on. Yeah.
No, thank you. Sister Amma, go ahead. That's why I had to involve you first in that process. So, Sister Amma, go ahead.
Sister Amma is somebody who is quite outspoken. You should have actually consulted me 2 or 3 speakers back. I will say that. So that is my feedback to you on reflection, because my hand was up and at least 2 other people have come in advance of me. But
Sorry for that. I apologize for that, Sister Amma.
That's okay, but I will point it out, because these are the things that we need to think about in terms of our culture. One of the things I will say about culture is we shouldn't be looking at things in a linear way. Culture underpins everything. And somebody said that culture impacts on the way we think. It underpins everything. The way we will think about and organize our economics, our politics, our society, our child rearing, even in our language. So if we look at language, I'll give an example. Some languages have pronouns, he, she, whatever. Some don't. Some languages have what you would call, let me think, names which are not gender specific, others don't. So let's maybe look at culture as underpinning everything. There is, and it's a shame that one of the lots and lots of our forefathers and mothers, and up to the present, are spoken about culture. One of the, I would say, not the best, but one of those who speaks a lot about how culture underpins the revolutionary process is Mikhail Cabral. And there's a book, Return to the Source, which at some point, if you know, those who haven't read it, I expect some of us have, if you can have a look at that. Mikhail Cabral from Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde. That is a very, very good book to read. I also think it is worth reflecting on what, and thanks very much to the sister who talked about pain, because we sometimes have this tendency to, I can't think of any other term other than hero worship some of our people, wonderful people, without actually really understanding the pain and trauma, both physical and psychological, and the sacrifices they must have endured. So somebody mentioned Steve Biko, and because Steve Biko in September, we remember him. The actual physical and psychological pain that Steve Biko must have gone through up until the end of his life, plus those who were left behind, his wife and his children. So these are discussions we have to have, and I think, and I will finish on this to give an example. One of the things which Martin Luther King and that whole I'll call it people's right movement did in the United States was they actually trained people to cope with some of the physical attacks that they might endure when going out. And I'm not getting into whether violence or non-violence is a principle or not, but when going out to organize sit-ins and protests and whatever, they trained them. They had people who would spit on them, throw things at them, hit them, thump them, as a way of how you as a human being endure that kind of physical pain, humiliation. You know, there's a whole range of things, and we have to discuss these things, because if we are to prepare ourselves, and more importantly, the wider group of us, all of our people out there, then we have to discuss and think through these things. And I will end on this note. The very, very final thing, and this is where I struggle with this particular author, is the focus always seems to be on a small, what I would call elite group or class, and no, at some point revolutionary change has to involve and include the majority, the masses of the people, because they are the ones who should benefit. The masses of the people, not a small elite class of intellectuals, educated technicians or whatever, but the majority of the people. And we're talking about real, and this again is where Cabral is very good, real meaningful change which impacts on people's lives, if not in the immediate, then the lives of their children. That's what everyone wants. They want real meaningful change which will impact on their lives being better, and if not for themselves immediately, then for the lives of their children and grandchildren. I will finish there, and I will. Oh, just one other thing is, could you share the link to the book again? Because I don't know what I've done, but because I switched machines, I cannot now find it. So could you actually share the link again for me, please?
Yes, I had shared the PDF here. Can I share the PDF for you, or you prefer the link?
No, share the PDF, and maybe if you can share it in WhatsApp, then, because I really don't know how I've lost it, but I somehow have lost it.
Yeah, I'll share in the WhatsApp. I was also trying even to share the return to the source, because it's in the library as well. The book you have also mentioned, and I'll probably reshare it in the WhatsApp as well, if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
And Sister Amma, I really wanted also to, because you are underpinning something very important on the welfare of the people. Because even if you talk of intellectual, talk of political, talk of anything you want to talk about, the key question is how does it attribute to the welfare of the people? You see, the masses. How does it bring tangible impact to their livelihood? You see, because irrespective of whether you want to call it despot or not, if it does not resolve to anything tangible to the welfare of the people, then of what benefit is it? And I really want to also engage you on this first element I've highlighted on economic liberalization. I actually have a counter opinion, and you have raised this in the past, Sister Amma, the concern by the author on the element of trying to, like you see what is proposing, economic liberalization require removal of state control on the economy, greater reliance on private sector, and a move towards market economy. I know you have stated your opinion or your stand on this. Would you like also to maybe comment on that explanation of what he calls economic liberalization?
Let somebody else speak, because I spoke for a long time, and then I will come back, just to give everybody the opportunity, because there are other hands up as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sister. So I'll share the book as well. Yeah, Brother Bongani, it's your turn now. Then we go to Sister Chisomo. Then Brother Ifo, your hand is the third hand here. Yeah, Brother Bongani, feel free to go ahead. And Brother Bongani, welcome to our class. I think this is your first time you're joining us. Welcome.
Oh yes, my son, when I saw that, can you hear me? Am I audible? I think I've got problems with network. One, I must apologize to Sister Amma. I mean, I didn't intend, I'm in and out here. So it keeps on kicking me out times, etc. Am I audible enough to everybody?
You're audible, brother.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, one, I've got what you sent me from the PG, and one, I hear this despotic, etc. But I think I want to agree with those that I talk of the culture. But my comment on the discussion, I browsed through the book. I didn't really read it critical. I understand you wanted people who might have gone through it critical. I browsed it through because I just got it, and I thought, let me just engage and learn. Yeah. There are different ways of learning. Yes, I fully agree with the concept of the culture. I'll explain that. But my concern with the whole thing of reformation, the reform, I think it's a misplaced wording within. I'm not too sure the author where it comes from, but the reform in the context of Africa, I don't think it will really work. It will sound like you're trying to fix the foot to fit the shoe. In the African context, I think it's basically the revolution. Because we are aware of the fact that we were imposed with a system that is not ours. That is why then I think I agree with all those that they talk of the cultural revolution. It can be cultural reform. That is my opinion. I might be wrong. Comrades will correct me. I just want to go through on a few things, the importance of culture, because I think what happened is the slavery colonial apartheid system. I'm Bongani Manke from South Africa. What have happened is what was our main strength, let alone all the other things physically that we have in Africa. It was at the cultural capital. And I heard people talking of languages and other things, but the cultural capital of the African continent, it was fundamentally underpinned by Ubuntu philosophy. I believe Kwame Nkrumah, when he came with conscientism, he was definitely even Nyerere that side in Tanzania and others. They were all underpinned by the philosophy of Ubuntu. Ubuntu has got its own economics, but what happened, I think the senior liberators at the time didn't really advocate Ubuntu philosophy with its economics as is. Now, as a result, the cultural capital component was easily eliminated out of the African people. I want to argue about just three capitals, just to make my point clearly. When you deal with a society like Africa in this context, that's why I disagree with the reform. I would always support a revolution because we are not going to reform a system that doesn't work for you, of which it was never our system. So we have a society that we have to institutionalize this thing. Now, the institutionalization of the African continent, one we have to look at, might be others, people might add on that. There is what we call the social capital and the cultural capital and the economic capital. That's what drives currently the system that we possibly envisage, of which the system that we might inherit. Because the people who came to us and imposed their system to us, they work on those fundamentals. Now, social capital and economic capital are the pillar of those two is the cultural capital. Actually, the real capital is the cultural capital. Now, as a matter of fact, we know that the democratic, the social capital in the context of what you call now the despotic systems or what we have in the African continent across. They enter the society through the social capital. And the social capital now we have what we call the pseudo-democratic capture. Now we have to deal with that. Now, do you need a reformation of a democratic capture, or do you need a revolution to that? Now, on the other side of the economic capital, you have what captures the economic capital is the financialization, where the economy is captured by the financial sector. That's what we are in now. I always preach wherever I go that we are controlled by debts that makes us slaves. Now, the capital, the cultural capital, through what we call the deracination, the moving away, taking us away from somebody talk of languages here, etc. So the deracination has been a very fundamental issue across all spheres of society, from the cultural capital point of view, be it religion, etc. To a point, all our rituals were taken away. I mean, at some point, you guys discussed the indigenous system, the indigenous knowledge system. That is premised exactly at the cultural capital. There is no way that the social capital and economic capital can thrive without a base of the cultural capital. Now, to summarize, because there are other people to talk. To summarize, I'm saying, do we really have to talk of reformation when we talk of a social capital that is captured by democratization? Therefore, it gives us what we call the democratic leaders that we know are artificial democratic leaders. And then do we have an economy where an economy is financialized? Now, going back, for example, all these, the countries that are assisting the developing countries, including the African continent, that they talk of, listen, you need to, I hear some of the words in the book that the few pages that you run through, words like liberalization, all those, South Africa, for example, where I come from, we're victims of things like liberalization, fiscal balance, and all those type of things within our macroeconomic system. And I'm arguing that these countries, they deliberately did. I mean, all the countries like your Britain and your US, all of them, they never build their economies out of all these things that we're talking about. The liberalization, I think it was mentioned in the book. I might have been wrong in my citations, but I hear the words like liberalization, etc., reforms, and all sorts of things. I'm saying we need to have a complete system that will talk of a cultural revolution. Those who talk of cultural revolution, I agree fully with them. A cultural revolution, because for you to build adequate institution in the society, they must be fundamentally based on a cultural capital. That cultural capital must therefore then be the pillar of the social capital and the economic capital. Then we're going to build adequate institutions that will be hard for things like indigenous knowledge systems for ourselves. Therefore, we can build then a diverse range of citizens. And that is what I would argue. My argument is, I think the word reform is misplaced in the book, whereas like liberalization and others, in the context of transformation, they don't work because those are the supplements to a democratic or a democratization that is captured already. Because in a context of culture, then you have to bring things like traditional leaders and other people. Now, how do we deal with that? Because African country was like that. How do we clean out our traditional leaders? We have our way culturally. All those things were taken away. So the Christianization or all the other religions that came in the African continent, they eliminated the cultural capital to a point that now we imported the whole system as is. Now we're trying to fix the system that we've imported. Now we talk of the words like a reformation. And I'm saying we, as an African continent, we have to deal with the cultural revolution. And the cultural revolution is going to deal with the intellectual drive towards that process of a new system. How then that is being done, it can be an issue then that can be dealt with amongst ourselves. I thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Bongan. You've talked on so many things. I also have an issue on reform or revolution. We've discussed this in our conscience in one of the Thursdays, but yeah, I'll share my thoughts on that also later. Let me get to Sister Chisomo, whose hand was up. Then we go to Brother Ifo. Sister Chisomo?
Okay. Yeah, I was going to comment on culture, but because a lot of people have spoken on other things, I'll see what I can do about this. So anyway, like we seem to agree, culture seems to be important as to us and as to Africans, and also that culture does apply to almost everything. We talk about organizational culture, people culture, all these different things. So when they talk about intellectual, political, obviously there'll be a political culture and a political this and that. So as far as culture is concerned, for the nationals who then don't understand the political culture, don't understand all these that have been listed here, there's a different culture to them that then conflicts with the political culture. That's why when they vote, they clash, people demonstrate and things like that. Then you've got we saw the Gen Zs in Kenya, a different culture, understanding things differently, and the whole thing was clashing. So culture is important. And also, like it's been said that it's not actually reform, it's revolutionary. So that would be the case because, again, reform, what is it that they're reforming? Which culture to which culture, or which political culture to which political culture? So, for example, in my country, they've literally had a position. Usually it's for the last two administrations, it's been given to the vice president to come up, I can't remember what the title is, but something to do with reforms. For the two administration, nothing came out of it because I think the person assigned can't work out what he's supposed to be reforming to what or whatever. Their understanding might have differed, but the nation never got anything out of it. So reform could be very tricky. And then the majority in our countries, maybe I should speak for my own country, the majority's culture is different from the elite culture, and the elite are very, very few. And the elite could be the ones that run the country. So if they are running according to their own culture, and the rest of the society is not understanding, then it becomes difficult. We've just had elections. There was this vice president who was from a difficult political party to the president. So he decided to go on the attack the last 2 months. He went through the whole country educating people on the same thing, how to understand how the system works, what they are trying to do to them, how they must respond using the vote. And he would say to them, measure things, measure performance, measure what's going on in this country according to what's going on in your home. Your Malawi is the one that's in your home. So when you sit at home with your family, sit down, try and understand how is this benefiting you? Everything the politicians are coming and saying we will do, we'll do, we'll do. How is it benefiting you as people? So then you go and vote. Don't vote because he's from your whatever, or you know him, or it's a family, like your family has been in that political party. Even if you're in a different political party, you can vote for another party. So that's what happened, and we got the results that we got. It seemed to have worked. And also the young people seem to have, although they were not allowed to demonstrate and things like that, they developed, again, their own culture through social media. They mobilized, they responded, they attacked and attacked. The politicians didn't know what to do. And we got the result that we got. So when we talk about reforms, maybe it is revolutionary, like what has happened to us. People actually refer to this election as a referendum. To then, politicians must learn. They must conform to our culture. Like people are saying, we are communal culture. Ubuntu applies. When you start replacing these things with democracy, all these other things that nobody seems to understand when you go down into the village or into the communities, they don't know what all these things mean. They're just words. So they then respond thinking, no, we want things our way. We want to be to understand exactly at our level, how are you going to communicate with us at our level? So this other guy was very good. He can communicate at upper level, lower level, middle level, explain things properly in a cultural way that people understand and not in a political way. Talk to people about the Constitution. They don't even know anything about the Constitution. You can reform it wherever you want, but the people don't understand what you're reforming and how they're going to conform to it. So words, and then culture, and understanding. What is it we're trying to achieve or get out of it? Thank you. And also one other thing I noticed, the writer keeps mentioning countries that in Africa might be considered white. You're talking about Egypt, Morocco, and all these countries that don't really have a different culture to us. So whatever he's explaining might not even apply to us. Thank you.
All right. I think I'm supposed to be next. My sister, it looks as if you and I are vibrating on the same frequency. Um, you have said most of what I wanted to say. The only thing that I would sort of, I think Elias, yes, as you said about Ubuntu, it is in how we do everything. And there is a danger in when we start pretending as if the colonial boundaries are actually real. Those things were created to destroy us and to efficiently steal our resources. They were not for us. So when we're talking about real unity and the revolution is to see ourselves not based on the colonial boundaries that were decided in was it the Berlin conference or whatever they had that conference, but instead see ourselves as who our ancestors said that we are. I think when we do that, we will start to work with each other differently, and we will also be able to resist the temptation of the colonial systems of government and also of the capitalist system. Now, one of the beautiful things, it's beautiful but it's painful, is that there is now overwhelming evidence of the failure of the colonial system, not just in Africa, but we are seeing it in the US, we're seeing it in Canada, where I am, with massive unemployment as well as massive homelessness. We have people who are working full time who cannot afford to pay rent. Similar situations happen across Europe as well. And so they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And uh, I do not wish for the disaster that has happened in America and in Canada to also be inflicted on our people. So, for the love of our people, we need to pay attention to these things and realize that the West, the so called West, has failed. There's much that the West can learn from our ancestors. There's very little that the West can teach us, except if you want to learn how to efficiently steal and subjugate people. That, they have more than PhD level understanding of that. But if we're talking about how to create a society that is loving, caring, nurturing, and healthy, the West has nothing to teach us. But our ancestors have a lot to teach us. That's deep within our culture. And I shall yield the mic. Thank you. Did we lose our host?
That's what I'm also wondering.
I think we did. I think that we were talking too much about culture, and the
Oh, you know
colonialists
what?
conspired with Zoom to get rid of this.
When you
But we
see
shall
the
prevail.
participant, yeah, okay, now we're back at 7. We were at 6, so now we're
Yes.
back at 7, so maybe it's back.
Yeah, that's him coming back. Welcome back, our host. You're muted, by the way. Okay.
Yes,
Sharing the
I'm
screen.
back. I'm back. Thank you. Sorry for what happened. I think it's my laptop. Sorry for that.
No worries. Welcome back.
Yeah, the last time I left, you were talking about if I think Sister Chisoma just ended her contribution and you were trying to come in. Was that right?
Yes, and I actually just finished my submission.
Okay, okay. Now, is there anybody who still want to share their thoughts before I come in a bit, also to share my thinking?
Can we have the previous speaker just quickly summarize his submission for you, since you were temporarily out of the room? Could he come
But
back and just quickly summarize for you?
Brother Ifo?
Okay. Yes. Now to remember where I was. What did I say? I think I talked about the allegiance to colonial boundaries that were created to efficiently steal our resources and not for us. So the importance for us to actually know who we are based on who our ancestors say we are, not who the colonialists say that they are. And I also talked about the what else did I talk about? Anybody here help me remember what I'm missing from my summary?
Ubuntu.
Yes, the spirit of Ubuntu, which will permeate, if we really are grounded in that, it will change how we relate to each other. I also talked about the fact that the Western system of government has been a colossal failure, not just in Africa, but we're seeing its failure in US, in Canada, in the rest of Europe. And so if we want something that's good for the masses, we should not be copying something that is evidently not good for the masses. I think that more or less summarizes it. Did I miss anything else?
Okay. Thank you, Brother Ifo. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
One, from my side is that I have an issue between the word reforming or revolution, because we have been looking about a despot. Now, we have had different opinion on even the definition of who is a despot. To some extent, in our reading, the author have mentioned some names of who is a despot, which we were not okay with. So the basis of him labeling one despot is not clear, even though in some instances he has said that people don't go through democratic process. And this so-called democratic process is actually a Western democratic process, which also we have issues with. But irrespective of who is being defined to be a despot here, we tend to agree that a despot probably is a government that is anti-people's welfare. That's what I will define a despot, a government that do not work for the welfare of the people. Now, any government to me that works for the welfare of the people and for the well-being of the people, I don't think I'll categorize it despot, irrespective of how they get in. That's my personal stand. Now, reforming, if from my definition of a despotic regime to my definition, a regime that do not work for the interests of the people, or a system that do not work for the interests of the people, I don't think it's something we can reform. That argument might be also seen same to the argument we are having today when people trying to reform the white supremacy system or want to integrate or be part of it or appear that they are accepting one or two people, like for example, accepting Obama to be a president of America, do not mean that now the still system of white supremacy could actually be for our benefit. Therefore, we had initially the discussion and debate about what is a reform and revolution. There's some conversation we can still have any other time. But basically what I picked from that conversation, the revolution is the competition, and that's what Nkrumah defined in his book, Conscientism. Nkrumah spent some almost one page, and the word revolution has appeared several times in Conscientism. But in one instance, Nkrumah is saying revolution is actually the fight against the old and the contest for the new. So the element of new, I don't think is reform. New is something very new totally. It's not a reformed. Some people might claim it's a brand new second hand. There's a word called brand new second hand. So it's an old new one. And basically, that's what reform will mean to me. You're having an old thing that is now appearing new. The basic tenets of that system is not destroyed. And until we destroy the basic tenets of that so-called system that not work for the people, then we cannot reform that tenets, because it's not meant for the welfare of the people. And therefore, I'll go with the word revolution, because reform is again reforming. If you break the word reform, you have the word form, which is create, which is recreating. So reforming is actually recreating what works. And some people can argue that, yes, we had a system that worked for us before, and therefore we are recreating that system, which means when we say we are reforming, is we are going back, what people sometimes call Sankofa. But when we say revolution, we mean we never had anything. We are creating a new thing. And basically, then the discussion can be taken further to people argue whether do we Africa need to Sankofa or to create a new thing? And if we Sankofa, then do we mean we are reforming, we are going back to form whatever we had left and walk away from? Or if we revolt, then does it mean we are, because it's a sudden change in the system. It's a total overhaul, actually. Now, are we building a new thing? As Nkrumah says, the contest against the old, and an opposition against the old and the contest for the new. So are we building a new thing that has never existed? Are we going back to something that had existed and worked for us? Those who call it Sankofa. Now, having spent my little time on that definition and why I don't agree with the word reform here, and maybe why also can agree with the other reform, whether we're going back to what we want to work for. But I want to concentrate a little bit on some of the few texts that I've highlighted, now irrespective of the context. One is that first paragraph that the author said that despotism is untenable and will eventually collapse or be toppled. I think it's evident that no matter how regimes become worse or anti-people in history, they'll always come down. And when I say worse, it's worse in terms of being anti-people or anti-masses. They'll always come down. Now, the issue is that most of their come down is very violent. And I think that's the thing we need to note as well, because why it become violent is that they don't want to walk out from power. So either people go through the so-called street revolution or anything you want to call, either goes through coups or anything of the sort you want to call. So most of those changes will always be very violent. Now, the author is also bringing a new, very important element here, that there's nothing like an enlightened despot. And I think there's been a conversation as well within so many of us Pan-African, whether do you have a benevolent, is it called a benevolent dictator? And the element is, why do you even call them benevolent dictator? Why do you even, first of all, call them dictators in the first place? Because as I've said, that definition, to me, is anybody who doesn't work for the interests of the people is a dictator. Anybody who works for the interests of the people, I don't think they're dictator, irrespective of the means they use to actualize what they want, but for the basic interests of the masses of the people. Now, I am also against the author's push for economic liberalization. There's a context that is very dear to this author, Dr. George Aiti, and the thing is, when he was an economist, one of whom our chair, Brother Kwame, would say a confused economist. But probably might also be influenced with what Nkrumah says, the colonial education that actually affected some of their thinking. So he pushed for liberalization, and he has spent quite of his time in the previous chapters talking about that concept of economic liberalization. But if you want to remove economies from state control, basically look even at our communal's existence. As much as the authors argued previously that there was private ownership in some level, I don't believe in that. We existed as a community, and I think this is what Brother Ifo you are trying to point out. The Ubuntu thing. We existed as a community. So if you remove state control, then you allow the market to be run by private sectors. And Sister Ahmad also raised this before. Private sector's interest is profit over welfare or service. I don't think our African society is ready for private or privatization or exploitation by the private sector vis-a-vis the state control. So I still believe and advance that the state must still have some controls in order to actually help sustain the welfare of the people. Because the reason why the state exists in the first place should be for the welfare of the people. And therefore, the state should not relegate that. So I have an issue with him in terms of that economic liberalization. When you talk of political reforms in the element of opening up political space, I don't understand that as well. I know some people had also categorized those who champion for one party state. You remember like what Nkrumah did with the CPP party. I know many other people also advanced for one party state. People call such being dictatorial enough or despotic. So when the author is proposing for opening up of political space and establishing something called democratic pluralism, which somebody will help me explain for me the word democratic pluralism in a simple way that some of us will understand. I also have an issue with that as well. I'm not that I am against people having political rights to practice or do whatever they want, but I am against finding that being very wrong to us. Now, in talk of intellectual freedom, of course, I actually accept freedom of expression, assembly, movement, and freedom of religion. I remember Nkrumah said that a state should be stateless, should be, what do you call, secular state. People should worship what they want, as some of us believe. But I think even in the current context where people are having freedom of religion, do the people practice our African spirituality really feel that they have the freedom? Because there's a lot of stigmatization from the community of those who practice probably the mainstream, they call the mainstream religion, either Islamic or Christian, and how they view those of some of our people who practice African spirituality. In fact, some are being labeled as witchcrafty and the rest. So I think that freedom of religion must also include the freedom of those who want to carry forth our ancestral spirit and our ancestral practice to be given space to do so. But I also think that there should be some regulations as well. Of course, people think that we should not attack Christianity or Islam, or some people also link it that, of course, it started from Africa. Some people say all religion, of course, in the world were created by black men. But I think my problem with religion is not the text, it's the use of religion. And this is something, of course, also Fidel Castro talked about. And I think in a book that Sister Ahmad requested me, is the context on, it's called Fidel and something. Sister Ahmad, you remind me that book, which we reviewed a bit in the library. I have issue on the use of religion rather than the religious doctrines, because I believe that there's no religion that is founded on injustice. Every religion is actually should, as the fundamental basis, is to fight for justice. So the usage of religion to advance injustices in a society or justify that is what I have an issue with. Now, when you say everybody, including the rat, should be above in the same level of law, I accept that, where that everybody in the society should be ruled by the law. But of course, we know, and that's what now becomes despotic when some people don't obey the law. And in many countries in Africa, and I think across the globe, some people are the law by themselves. Last time I learned about the constitutional democracy, where the constitution is the supreme. But we know what goes on. It's been written in the book, The Animal Farm, that other animals are more animal than others. So I have an issue. I don't have an issue with the independent judiciary as such in upholding the rule of law, and I wish, of course, to have an independent judiciary. I have an issue with also lack of professionalism in our police, military, and security forces. Actually, the despots use the same forces to advance what they do for us, you see, as a people. They torture us using the same forces. They kill our people using the same forces. So I really advance that if we could have professionalism in the police, military, and security forces, and I really think that somebody should do a research, or if there is research is existing, on the psychology of these men and women who are in uniform. Is it that the training or the module of their coaching is what makes them be so inhuman in their some areas in terms of how they exercise their role? And I think this was just a pause. If you go back and look at the clip of the Gen Z protests in Kenya and how the police officers handled them, and contrast that to the Gen Z protests in Nepal and how the police officers behaved. And I think even in some parts of Europe as well, the amount of force that the police officers use to control protests or dissent voices vis-a-vis the amount of force that is used in some parts of the continent. So I don't know if the training module need to be worked on. Now, those are a few things I have an issue on. And I am also very interested in this element where the author says that political reform is out of question to a despot, as that will amount to committing political suicide. I don't know what others think about this. Currently in the continent, you're facing some situations whereby some so-called politicians do not allow some of their opponents to even run for their so-called political positions as a threat and the rest. A critical example is the one which is going on in Tanzania, the neighboring country here, where the opposition leader is being found to have committed treason, and many of the dissenting voices that are valuable enough are actually being curtailed not to actually rise against the government. The same thing was to happen in Uganda. Some of the different opposition forces, including Bobby Wine. Of course, people also have various opinion on Bobby Wine, whether he's a genuine revolutionary or not. But Bobby Wine was being denied to contest in the upcoming election until I think they wrote other papers, then he was cleared to run for that. And you have seen some of these elements working out all over. Kisa Besigye, a good example in Uganda as well, is still being detained up to date, a very old man. So those are things that have a problem as well. Now, is a formula of you start with the what you call intellectual, political, constitutional, institutional, and finally economic liberalization. What I will say is that, as most of us have said, and I agree with all of us, that all these are just cultural. Because there's cultural element in everything else, which means what I learned in my early studies of what is the definition of culture, I learned that culture is the way of living. And therefore, everything mentioned here is part of our way of living. So I agree with them, but I don't agree, as I've said, also with the word economic liberalization. And what he says here, Sister Kalita, I'll take your hand once I'm done with my comment. I think in the next 2 or 3 minutes, 2 minutes maximum, I'll allow space for other members who also feel want to come in to comment on this. Now, when the author says that economic liberalization before political reforms put the cart before the horse, and political reform before intellectual also is the same. I tend to agree with this a bit, and not in the element of economic liberalization, but in terms of, I think Nkrumah also said it, that seek ye first the political kingdom. I think he says something like that. And therefore, I think that political reform is very important. If we put it together in the context of all as cultural reform, I think the political element of reform is also very important in a society. Because then if you make proper political reforms, then you can safeguard the gains of any economic reforms you want to make in a country. If we go with the reforms as the author is talking about, I equally I support what you call intellectual freedom, but I talk of, I talk of intellectual reform as well. Because for people to make conscious political choices, they must be intellectually informed, not in terms of being educated, but at least they need to be informed for them to make informed political choices. So if you have a society that is not informed, and you want them to make informed political choices, then I don't think it works out. So I somehow tend to agree on that, irrespective of the other few things that I'm not in order with. So basically, that's what I'll say. The rest down here is not some few things, but of course the context is trying to raise. I have also issues on countries trying to mention, but this element that if they refuse, they will be consumed by the flames of ensuing revolution. So the element is that if the despots open up the political space, they will be tossed out in an election. But again, my question is, then if you don't want to face the people and change over power, if that is the case, then until when are you going to hold on? I am told Museveni has said that he's going for the last term, but he might also go for another term. So he's been in power for over 40 years. He had the other lady, the daughter of one of the presidents in West Africa, telling the people, don't vote my father again, because he's been there almost for 49 to 50 years. So those are a few of the thoughts I have in regards to this text, and these are my personal thinking. And of course, you are free to criticize this and also to share your own thinking. That's the end of my thinking. Sister Kanita, please come in. And anybody want to come into this conversation, feel free as well to raise your hand.
Thank you very much. So I put in the comments my own ethnic heritage as a reference to something that one of our sisters said earlier about the countries that were being mentioned as an example. And I know one of the countries was Egypt, one of the countries was Madagascar, and there were some other ones mentioned. I thought her comment was important and really bears some clarity, because if those countries that are mentioned, if the incidences they're talking about have to do with the indigenous peoples, then by all means, yes, mention them as examples. But if those countries have to do with the invaders who are currently in power, then I don't think it would be very applicable and have much meaning for me personally. That's the first point that I want to make. So I was happy when she mentioned that, and I thought that more we could have expanded on that a bit more. I also want to put in a second plug about adding to culture courage, the courage to bear up and to do what we do, because it's going to be very costly in a number of ways, noble as it is. But the third thing that I also want to comment on is this issue, and people have been saying it for decades, is very, very PC to say it, and that is, we don't want to attack someone's religion. In my former life, I was a pastor's wife for 20 years. I graduated from seminary. I'm now a traditionalist. If you tell anybody, I'll deny it, that I was a pastor's wife. As you can appreciate, as a seminary student, we go through the teachings of that religion quite thoroughly. And it is abundantly clear in that teachings, as well as in the teachings of the Quran and other teachings, that anybody who is not a congregant or a follower of that religion, there are pejorative terms and titles for those people. And there are a lot of elements in those teachings that are antagonistic to your freedom of expression and your sovereignty. And it gives divine endorsement to aggress against it. And I know this most intimately from Christianity, that sees it as its mission that you should and must convert. That is nothing peaceable and lovely and wonderful. That is not somebody creating an institution as an option, should people so choose. In fact, the way the religions were weaponized, I'm certainly not telling you, any of you, something that you don't know. Part of what was weaponized to help subdue the African continent. And in fact, if you look at John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, he goes through and gives abundant specific examples and documentations of the ways in which this was done contemporarily. So I caution against touting the party line of, oh, we don't want to attack someone's religion, when we are, by virtue of the teachings, at once under attack. So what we are doing is actually self-defense. And I know it sounds nice, I know we mean well, and I think we're trying to be civil and peaceable, and that's fine. We're trying to be accommodating and tolerant. Those things are fine. But I would caution against at once or singularly making comments and sentiments that are antagonistic to religion as attacking it when we are in fact under attack. And we have been. The way these religions landed on the continent and the way they spread was not because of intellectual discourse. It was not because of the aesthetics and how lovely and wonderful and appealing they were to the African ethos, the African philosophical system and African culture. These things were brought about by torture and rape and murder and various other forms of mayhem. It's just a historical fact. So I want to go on record as saying that we are in fact under attack, and anything that we do to the contrary is self-defense. So again, thanks to everybody. I really am humbled by how much I'm learning from everyone's comments, and for the information that's being put forth in the pages of this book. I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity. And with that, I'll mute my mic and continue to listen and learn.
Thank you, Sister Kanita. Sister Chisomo? Then you go to Brother Bungani. Sister Chisomo?
Hello. Yeah, so just to comment on, I think you were talking about economic liberalization, which I would have thought would promote perhaps equality, access, inclusion, and all that stuff. But instead, more and more, we've seen countries, and especially my own, taking these things away from people, exclusion to a very high level, and working against people, denying them their rights or accessing anything at all, either through corruption, criminal activities, syndicates taking place. In my country recently, the word being used was cartels. There were cartels everywhere that nobody could control. President did not say anything. Towards the end, he then issues a statement to say, oh, I know what was going on. I know who was doing it. All that petrol that was missing, I knew who was doing it. But if you vote for me, I will arrest them. So that's what you get. And then, and also, I have lost my thought there for that other one. Yeah, so economic liberalization. So what they're doing is privatizing and privatizing and privatizing. Public services, you get parastatals, I don't know what you call them in your countries, parastatals being closed down. All that happened in 5 years, all of them being closed down, moving everybody, every institution, every department to the capital city so they can control things properly and loot and loot and loot. And there was massive looting. And then land law that says, oh, the land will now belong to the government, meaning the chiefs and the whoever's, we know, district councils, we no longer have power. So then so I was wondering why land is being sold so much. And I'm thinking, where's all this land coming from? Then I realized that they were changing the laws to take all the land back to say now it'd be like here, oh, it belongs to the crown. So people, chiefs and gangsters and whoever's were just selling land randomly, because once it's sold, at least they've earned from it. The chiefs and all these criminals have now obtained money from it, although it didn't belong to them. And by the time the government comes to say where is the land, it's all gone. So it's things like that, and centralizing things, literally leaving buildings empty that were purposely built for certain functions or departments to rent in the capital city, moving all the stuff to the capital city. And when we say capital city, it's not as if They're in different parts of the capital city, to this one central
Okay.
place that they are, and renting, moving everybody. How much money was that? Now, this government, the new government is now saying, we'll move everybody back and we'll decentralize. Things will now be governed in the districts. So all of us who were in all these other districts had no access to anything. Even if you wanted to go to the housing department, you couldn't because it's moved to another district. You can't get there. It's about 4 or 5 miles, 5 hours to get there by driving. So you have to phone them. And when you start phoning them, they want money, they want this and that. If you don't pay, you're doomed. So literally everybody now had no access to anything. So people started complaining. Then there was, like I said, conflict between their political agenda or the political culture and the people. It was just painful. It was oppressive. It was traumatizing. A lot of people were committing suicide, mental health. We saw a lot of things happening because when politicians are doing this, forcing different cultures on us, forcing us to do things, I don't know whether it's their way or the way that they're getting, learning from other people to do things, because we'd hear that, oh, they've gone to this country to go and learn how to do A, B, C, D, meaning corruption or whatever. They've gone to this country. Oh, the forex is shortage because it's being diverted to this country and then back in again at a different rate. So the rest of the people were just left out completely. So when we talk about reforms or and economic liberation, they're just doing the opposite. I don't know whether it's deliberate or they too don't understand the systems that they're trying to deploy, and they just then create their own thing that benefits themselves. Because I'm sure even the systems that they're following didn't mean for them to do what they're doing, but they've come up with their own system. I suppose that's their reforms to say, forget what these other procedures and processes. Let's just do things this way. We've had elections. Now we're being told the president cannot be sworn until after 7 days. For what? Why? To do what? So within the 7 days, we now hear all the offices have been looted. The people have disappeared. The money is gone. 3 trillion disappeared in 1 month. So it's things like that, and people just so desperate. When they lost the government, people, even I felt it. And I remember my friend saying, I met somebody in the shop, they were saying, oh, it's like being in a different Malawi. It just felt different. People were dancing everywhere in South Africa, in whichever country, just dancing. And somebody then said, do you know what? We did not vote for this guy. We were voting to just get rid of you people. So then to do that, they had to vote for this guy and to get rid of this one. So I feel sorry for the new government. What are they going to do? Because this has shown nobody was listening to the people. The people have decided. So what is the next government going to do? Which culture, which approach are they going to take? Because it's a previous government that has messed up before. Is it not business as usual for them? Will they reform? Will they revolutionize? Will they bring in different people? Towards the end, we saw the presidents, the candidates, now changing their approach to who they choose as the vice president. They were now bringing in technocrats. Oh, I want technocrats, but I don't want people who don't know what they're doing. So I don't know whether there's going to be any change or worse, or I don't know where we're going with all this.
Okay.
I'm just so scared. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Chisomo, for sharing practical situation in Malawi. That more and more speak to what you're discussing in terms of the practicability of what you're discussing on the ground as well. So thank you very much for that. Brother Bongani, we are having 8 minutes to end, but Brother Bongani, come in, please. And if there's any member who want to speak as well, please let your hand be up. We are taking the last bits of our conversation for today as we move to...
Thanks, Chair. Yes, thanks very much. I hear the word privatization being thrown in the discussion, of which, of course, the issue of culture is very fundamental, because culture, as we're discussing now in the African context, it defines the success of what they call proselytization. I so wish that I pronounced it correctly. There was much success out of the Ignatius Loyola missions, in terms of, I think it was started somewhere in the 1400, where the whole issue of the culturalization of the prospective or potential colonial states had to be conquered. Proselytization. That's how then the Christianization, I'm talking from the perspective of the Christian societies. I have been in the Muslim societies. I haven't really heard much of Muslim countries that have colonized countries like Christian colonizers did to their colonies. So we are dealing now here with two P's, that is the proselytization, the Christianization of the colonies. Now it's a matter of now privatization of the colonies. Now all that happened through the lawyers being entrusted as sanctifiers. Now, when the lawyers became sanctifiers, it went to international business transactions, follows a suit of, to encompass the social engineering as well as the political societal systems. That is why I dispute the issue of reform as is presented in the book. Now, we have to face the reality that, well, of course, proselytization has been a success. We have Christians, like I think the speaker just before the later speaker, she mentioned, we cannot run away from the fact that African people are believers. Unfortunately, we've been sleeping to a point that our African belief systems, underpinned by Ubuntu, hasn't made much inroads through our liberators by the time, and to a point that the issue of the culture, it has been a big debate. The Cultural Revolution has been a big debate as to, I mean, there was at some point conflicts with the diaspora, with the African people here in Africa, how we deal with the matter of culture. Now, those are realities that we have to deal with. We're living in a society that people have been proselytized. That is a Christianization. There's the dominance of belief systems. And to an extent that the African belief systems have been lagged in that process. Now, how we go about it. So we need to look at it now. How then now we try to make it a point that the social engineering, because there is no way that we are going to unite. I hear so many people talk about Africa must unite now. But you need to talk of social engineering here before you can start to say, let's unite now. Because the African society has been segmented in a manner of so many instruments. Religion has been a powerful instrument. Unfortunately, politics have assisted the process of this demarcation amongst the societies. Now, how do we go about to say, how do we unify these people? Of course, development to a great extent. I think that's what Nkrumah envisaged. That development, because through development, then you will get other offsprings. The offsprings of development, once that we envisage development, we'll start to talk of industrialization, the welfare, and other things. But we must face the realities. Can we, I don't know if there is a word called proselytization. I don't think there is such a word in English. Now, we have to look and say, well, the reality is African people are believers. How did then now we launch a revolution out of the believers? That is the African people, meaning which we don't have to really be an enemy of Christianity, as is or rather, let's put it across board, a religion, as is of which Christianity was supposed to claim, because a religion, actually, to an extent, it has a lot to do with humanity as human beings and peoplehood. So now, how do we institutionalize this whole process in context of our revolution? That is the cultural revolution. How do we culturalize the current existing religious formations that happen to be within our society that we're living with? Now, the interpretation will be fundamental as an instrument. Now, it will assist that then, because from a policy point of view, as sanctifiers, lawyers as sanctifiers, how do we turn around the issues of business transactions that then follows that social engineering that we inherited in any case? That's why the author talks of reformation. So there's so much that we need to deal with. Yes, Africa must unite now, but Africa must unite now on technical matters. The sister in Malawi talks of practical matters. So what I'm saying is we need to shape a society with our African beliefs underpinned by Ubuntu that I think it was somehow overlooked in the process, to an extent, in the process of liberation. I look across all the countries that have gone through liberation. We have Abo Nkrumah, Abo Mandela in South Africa, etc. All of them were schooled through the Western education system, of which then it was good. There's nothing wrong to learn from your neighbors. But now what we have to look at is, what do we then do now to consolidate all these things together and make people understand? I mean, for example, what is good that we can take from the Bible? What is good that we can take from the Quran? What is it that we want as African believers? When you champion that, then we'll be in a better position to deal with the revolution that we're talking about. Then it will assist us then now to talk of a real revolution. And then it will assist us to start to develop institutional framework in an African content, an institutional framework that favors us, that talks to us. You know, there's so many things that one can talk of, the things that are encumbrances or rather impediments to the African development, governance, corruption, and so forth. All those things, they revolve around governance. Yeah, where I would suggest that in my case, where I'm sitting with my observations, with no real literature or research attached to it, is that we need some kind of a hybrid system where our cultural heritage is protected. But this cultural heritage, it requires a hybrid of some kind of a democratic element, not a Western democratic system. One will argue that no, of course, we always have a democratic system in the African continent. But in the process, we lost that. As a result, then we end up having dictators. I think it talks to the topic of the discussion here. We end up having dictators in the form of kings, etc., where people started to trade people, is the same manner that we're experiencing now. The political leaders are trading people for them to sit on the table of the Western hegemony. So how then now we bring that together, all those elements together, that talks to how do we then bring our people back, as much as they Christians, but they must understand they're Africans. The underpinning phrasing is Ubuntu, or philosophy is Ubuntu. And therefore, then we'll be able to deal with the issue of the laissez-faire economic system that has been, I think it was structured somewhere in 1920, 20, whatever, 25, whoever called the French philosopher who brought them, that, you know what, we need to have what to call the neoliberal system. So the neoliberal system, that as a result, we became victims of it. So those are the areas that we're faced with. One is how do we challenge the proselytization that became a success, that I want to believe it was structured through the Society of Jesus in the context of Christianity. Now, proselytization became a success. Now, what they're pushing through now to us is privatization. It must be a success. And the reality is the developed countries never made their successes through all these liberal, the laissez-faire policy formulations that have been an offspring of lawyers as sanctifiers. Lawyers as sanctifiers, as a result, then the policy framework will be directed in a particular direction. So from an intellectual perspective, those are things that we have to look at. And I think the post-World War II have actually put a stamp to these lawyers as sanctifiers. Therefore, then we end up being extremely colonized through a policy framework. Now we have to engage with the developed world from the position where they are, that we needed to comply with the rules of the World Trade Organization, where then we cannot just do anything as we want in our countries. There should be some methodologies that we apply, things like protectionism, but in the protectionism approach, where the emerging companies in countries are being protected, are being promoted so that they can be capable to compete worldwide. But you cannot allow a firm in an engineering firm in Ghana to immediately compete with the world global firms, while we are aware of the fact that we're still colonized because the finance currently is what is controlling us. That is what I call in the diagram I share with you, that the financialization of the global economy. That's where we are, and that's where then we have to talk of revolution, meaning which the whole concept of from the League of Nations to the United Nations, the Charter of the United Nations becomes irrelevant, meaning which the African people have to deal with our cultural revolution and start to talk to ourselves and then institutionalize that. That will incorporate things like indigenous knowledge systems. That will be championed by us. And it is an opportunity for us now because everything falls apart. Things are collapsing. I thank you very much.
Oh, Brother Wongani, if no time, I could have just listened to you for the longest time possible. Let me know when you'll be ready for me to sit down and some of us to sit down and listen to what you're sharing, Brother Wongani. Not in a hurry, but more of like a presentation. We'll give it time, whether on our Saturdays, Brother Wongani, or any other time. But I do appreciate your comment as well. Sister Chisomo, we are late, but if you have something, because your hand is up, I will allow you to go ahead. But briefly, Sister Chisomo.
Okay. Yeah, briefly, just one example on religion. Up until to this point, my country was calling itself a God-fearing nation. So because of this term that kept being used, to get rid of the previous one who was a lawyer, then the other party appointed a reverend or a pastor, something to that level, to become the political leader. So people got attracted to the religious person. Or if he becomes the leader, then things will be good for everybody and whatnot, forgetting it's got nothing to do with governance. So the guy comes in, he's just all over the place, not knowing what to do. And then people are like, no, that's not what we meant. And that's why they've now gone back, because this religious thing did not work. And they have vowed never, ever again to have a religious person or a pastor as a leader. Because all we saw was churches, this church, that church, this church, that church, as if the country has become a church, and the Muslims started complaining. So religion played a big role in this, to bring this administration in. In the end, it delivered nothing because it had nothing to do with governing the country. And the whole thing flopped to the extent that people suffered so much. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I'm sorry for ever trying to cut you short. But yeah, the same question on religion is what you had with Kenya with President Ruto. He wanted to believe in a church in State House. But comrades, permit me to thank you all for your time. It's been an interesting conversation, but it has opened up other doors, because that's why I love the value of critical thinking. So you don't think in what some people say, you think outside the box. So we have shared our thinking beyond the text. And key issues that have come out very strongly is the element of cultural revolution and all the element of us to look at our culture. I think we really need to see how we can have this very clearly, because I think that's very important for us. Because as I've said, to my definition, culture is a way of living. We need to look at our entire 360 way of living in our cultural perspective. So I want to thank you very much for your time. And yeah, next time we'll be looking at this chapter 6 on now the stirrings for freedom. When we are done with this book, we'll always just have a time for another book, and maybe this time around we'll have to vote for other books that will come after this. So let's meet again next Monday. We have moved this session for the last 2 sessions to Monday. Let's meet next Monday. But also join us because this society has been talked about. On Thursdays, we are still in chapter 3 on consciousnm, which is society and ideology. Join us so that we can look at the society in terms of ideological standpoint, so that we can also continue this. So may you have a lovely evening to you all, or lovely night to you all from wherever you are, and let's meet again next either on Thursday or even Saturday for Africa Unification, or next Monday. I'll always share the recording for these sessions that are available on my YouTube channel. Sister Amma?
Yeah, I'm just saying good night, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Good night to you all. See you next week.
Good night.
Good night.